from a nutritional perspective or functional medicine perspective and thinking about immune resilience, I mean,
Yes.
it makes total sense that we all have different levels of immune resilience at any one point in time, right? And
Yes.
so, and also immune resilience is something that you build up ahead of time. Once you're faced with, a germ that's trying to make you sick, you're in a totally different scenario. Your body is using nutrients totally differently. To make you sick, it has to already get past things like your barriers, your frontline barriers, and the microbiome might be off or whatever, And so finally, if it reaches your immune system and starts to make you sick, it's come through a lot of different layers. And so, we all would have different levels of resilience in those different layers before that germ arrives even to meet an immune cell.
Welcome to the Good Life Coach podcast. I am your host, Michele Lamoureux. The intention of this show is to awaken you to your fullest potential. Join me each week for inspiring interviews to elevate an area of your life, as well as interviews with women entrepreneurs who are creating success on their own terms. Each episode provides actionable tips to guide you to design a life you love. Hey there, it's Michele Lamoureux, and welcome back to the Good Life Coach podcast. I'm so excited for today's conversation. We are going to be learning about immune resilience. And with COVID that we've been living through the last few years, I think understanding this is important, but it's just also so fascinating and I think important to understand. And we have the benefit of having Romilly Hodges on the show to help us uncover and understand it through her book and recent work. Her book is called Immune Resilience, The Breakthrough Plan to Protect Your Body and Fight Disease. And I found this book fascinating, and we earmarked some sections to go back to because it's just, there's so much to learn and understand. Romilly is a clinical nutritionist certified by the American Nutrition Association in the state of Connecticut. She is also a functional medicine practitioner and spent several years as the director of nutrition programs at a clinic in Connecticut. And I believe that was with
Dr. Fitzgerald. Yeah, Dr. Kara Fitzgerald.
Yes, I was going to say Dr. Kara Fitzgerald, who is the author of Younger You, who was recently on, right? Was it her clinic that you were?
That's right. Exactly that. Yes. In fact, we worked on that study together over the years. So
she mentioned that. Yes. And she said your book was coming out at the same time. So I'm so glad that she connected us. So welcome. I'm very happy to have you on today.
Thank you, Michele. It's just a pleasure to be here. Thank you for everything that you do. And now I'm excited to chat about this.
Yeah, it's such an important topic. I think we don't really, we hope our immune system's working, right? And then, it gets put to the test for whatever reason. And, we hope that it does what it's intended to do. So I'm really excited to learn more. But take a minute to introduce us in your words in terms of the kind of work that you do and the kinds of patients you see. So we have, we have a better understanding of what you do day to day.
For sure. Yeah. So I really came into this field, nutrition and functional medicine. I'm a clinical nutritionist working in the sort of the broader scope of functional medicine. But I had a first career in a business and technology think tank as an analyst. And so that's where I was for the first part of my career. And then like many of us who get into this field, it's something that happens in your life that creates this change for you.
Yes.
And so for me, it was having kids, and my firstborn really struggled with digestive issues and really top to toe eczema. We discovered food allergies, the whole, kind of a gamut of immune issues. So immune health was really my window into this field. And then sort of my research brain went into hyperdrive. I started focusing on like, what can I do? Because my questions were really, how do I make sure that my child has everything in their diet that they need to stay healthy and strong and grow properly? But also, why is this happening? And what could we possibly do? And I learned about things like the atopic march, which is this progression from eczema to other kinds of sensitivities, such as food allergy, hay fever, asthma. And we know now through research that actually you can get sensitized to different environmental things like even food or pollens through your skin as well as through the digestive tract. So this is,
wow.
So looking at that kind of stuff and what could we do to possibly help minimize that progression, to reduce this tendency towards immune dysfunction. And so then, that really has been my interest in sort of as well, the broader scope of immune health from autoimmunity. And then also in this book, particularly in how we can support our immune system do that really important job of protecting us when we do encounter germs, which is actually every single day.
Yes.
We encounter sort of millions of different kinds of microbes, and our immune system has to go through this really incredible process of figuring out, what do I need to do for this microbe, if anything? And if it is something that's trying to harm us, how does it ramp up and create that response to ultimately kill the germ and keep us safe? Wow. So, my interest really marrying that with what I learned from nutrition and functional medicine was to try to take a comprehensive view of all of these natural factors that play a role in how well our immune system functions. So everything from diet, from exercise, stress levels, sleep levels, our exposure to toxins, what else? Like nutrients, different botanicals and supplements, and like all of these different things, because really we each have, a unique situation with our immune system where we have different holes or gaps that we might want to fill, and that we need to shore up a little bit. So what one person does might be slightly different from what another person does, depending on our unique situation. So yeah, that was the premise for writing this book. It was an amazing opportunity to be able to do so. I thoroughly enjoyed that process.
Did you start it before COVID or just during COVID?
It was before. So I had all of these materials.
The timing, it's...
And then, there was sort of this moment where, oh my goodness, this is, a global pandemic.
Yes.
I need to kind of focus in on getting this sort of together and out there. And so that's what ended up amazingly happening.
Yes, the timing is definitely, it's especially relevant. I think it's nice to have like a foundation for the conversation. So immune resilience, just give us, what does that mean? And maybe just give us a basic understanding of what the your definition of the immune system.
Of the immune system. Yeah, yes. This is really important because we often think of it as just, our immune cells that go around the body, either surveying and looking out for different germs that might come. And then they have to obviously ramp up when they do mount an infection. So that's kind of the classic, what we think of as our immune system, perhaps. But, and this is really important in the book, as I lay it out, so that there are really three big pillars to our immune system, and our immune cells are one of them. They do all kinds of important things. They literally can go around gobbling up little germs. They can shoot little bursts of oxidative chemicals that destroy things. They produce antibodies, of course, really important. Yes. The other pillars are, number one, your barriers.
Yes.
So that's everything from your physical barriers that line your skin, your digestive tract, your nasal passages, your mouth. Everything is a barrier between the outside world and your internal body, right? But we can also have, and just to mention for those and for all of these things that I'm going to talk about, there are so many interactions between our nutritional health, our diet, our lifestyle, and how well these things are functioning. Then we also have things like our chemical barriers. So saliva, for instance, that's already busy killing germs that enter your mouth.
Yep.
Tears.
Yes,
tears as well. Stomach acid, that kills oodles of germs, right? So, in that context, we might think differently about taking an antacid so regularly. there are actually studies on showing that if you take something called a PPI, which is a prescription antacid, for at least 3 months, then you have a much higher risk of having drug-resistant germs residing in your digestive tract and things like that, because the stomach is a natural barrier just in itself. And so obviously you shouldn't stop a medication that's been prescribed to you without discussing with your doctor. But oftentimes as a nutritionist, there are lots of different ways that we can help work on reducing the reason why you're taking that medication, the reflux, the heartburn. And, you know, if we can solve it that way, then that's one less risk factor for sure. And then the third pillar is not even part of us, but it's still so important, and that is our microbiome. So it's so essential for our immune system that really it's a strategic ally to what we're doing, and our immune system can't function even without it.
Can you explain can you tell us what a microbiome is for anyone who hasn't heard it? Because I actually had that as a question to ask you as well.
Yes.
I think people have heard about, the microbiome is so important, but I don't think a lot of people know what it is.
What it is. I know. It's so fascinating. So your microbiome is the collection of all of the helpful germs, helpful bacteria, even viruses and some fungi and things like this, helpful ones that naturally reside in us and on us. Most of them are in our digestive tract. And in fact, most of them, even within that, are in the colon. But, so for the colon, they've estimated that I think it's around 3 pounds of weight in the colon is actually bacteria.
No way.
Bigger than the size of an adult brain, for instance. Like, it's a massive amount. And we actually
our bodies are so fascinating. There's all this stuff going on and we have no idea.
And they actually have also estimated that we have more bacteria in us and on us than we do human cells. You know,
we're more
which is a little bit of a
than
scary
human
thought.
cells. We're
more bacteria than we have our own human cells.
Wow.
Which is also a little bit mind-blowing. I mean, these are much smaller. And, you know, one of the only places where I'd say it's probably good not to have a democracy.
Yes. Take over. The good stuff can take over. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So, they're really that essential. So some of the things that these helpful bacteria can do, well, first of all, they metabolize a lot of food and plant compounds, phytonutrient compounds for us, making them active in our bodies so that they can do all their wonderful anti-inflammatory things that they do. They act on non-fermentable carbohydrates or different types of fibers in your diet to produce compounds called short-chain fatty acids.
Yes.
The most well-known of which is called butyrate. And that is very nourishing to your digestive tract. And it's also important in signaling to the immune system how to behave, how not to be driving up inflammation unnecessarily, how to balance the different types of immune activity so you have less tendency towards allergic disease, for instance. So it's a really important molecule that we get from these helpful bacteria. But, beyond that, even the bacteria, the helpful bacteria that we have, they are able to crowd out potential pathogenic or harmful bacteria, and they produce certain compounds called bacteriocins, which kill harmful versions of that family of bacteria. So that's another way that they can help. In fact, so I gave one of the examples before, is Staphylococcus epidermis being able to act against Staphylococcus aureus. And there are even some forms of E. coli, helpful E. coli, called E. coli Nissl is one of them, which is actually available in supplement form. And that is known to act against harmful versions of E. coli. So there's really interesting ramifications of these bacteria. And even when we're very young and our immune system is learning about its environment, right? And it's learning what's safe, what's not safe. I mean, the complexity in that with all of these different things that we're exposed to is quite mind-boggling. But we know that if we have an imbalance in our microbiome, especially early on when our immune system is learning, then we have more tendency towards allergies, autoimmunity, even infectious disease. And researchers have shown in studies of germ-free mice, where they're actually able to create totally sterile, no microbiome mice, that they have a much smaller thymus gland, which is an important immune gland, a smaller spleen, which is an important immune gland, less active immune cells, and immune cells that are more skewed towards allergies. So, again, just really important. And we can heavily influence our microbiome through our food choices, and through all different kinds of things, our sleep, whether we're really stressed or not, the different levels of nutrients that we have. So all of those things go into, so the book really is to try, again, to just wrapping our arms around all of those different factors. There's some quizzes in there to try to help figure out which parts, where am I more vulnerable, right? So in this whole picture and landscape of our immune system, where are my vulnerabilities and what can I do to shore those up?
Yes. When you're talking, all I could think about is just, first of all, I'm sort of in amazement and of just how beautiful our bodies are. I mean, they're designed to protect us. And you just talked about all those various layers that just are there. And then it makes, as I'm sitting here I was running an errand this morning and I told my husband to get me a blueberry scone. I usually eat pretty healthy, but I know there's sugar in there that's not good for me. It's like, as you're talking, all I could think about is, gosh, it really, knowing that, it makes me want to do even better. I would say I eat really well. I do eat really, I'm pretty proud of that, but I don't necessarily deny myself the occasional scone or something like that.
And I think, this is an important point as well. I think that there's nothing, if we aim, my goal is always, unless there's a particular reason why you'd want to do more, then the best thing to aim for is like 80% of the time you're eating.
I am
spot on, and then that does, we do need some space in our life for little bits of deviations, because if we're too strict, first of all, it plays on our mental health. There's a growing problem of an overly focusing on very strict healthy eating. There's even a term for it, which is orthorexia. So it's an identified problem that we can be overly concerned and overly focused on only eating healthy foods, such that we are, our stress level will go up if we can't access that healthy food.
So we might
deny ourselves.
You're almost undoing the benefit of what you're trying to do by being so overly strict or focused on it.
It's exactly. But that said, I'm totally with you that to me, it's really understanding those connections is so motivating, right? Because when we really know what's going on, then we know that if we
cheer for the team, let's help that microbiome out instead.
Exactly.
Let's do what we can. Well, I'm so excited to learn more. Go ahead, please. What were you going to say?
No, well, if you want me to, I was going to pick up on the concept of sugar and how that impacts
sugar. We do know that sugar is not. I mean, that creates inflammation and
inflammation. We do know that, and it's unfortunately very harmful to our microbiome as well, because it feeds the bad bugs instead of the good bugs as well. And there was a bunch of researchers who were in Switzerland at this prestigious university, and during COVID, they switched from what they were focusing on, which was actually artificial intelligence to study the brain and brain health and neurodegeneration. And they switched their artificial intelligence machines, learning machines, to look at factors that were influencing COVID vulnerability. And one of the things that came up, so their AI system, basically was able to scan all published literature, scientific literature, which, as an individual, as a human, it's really hard to keep up with all of that literature that's published, right? So AI is a very promising tool to help scientists, clinicians, all of us to be able to synthesize scientific literature. So it was able to scan thousands of papers that were being published on COVID, and it came to focus on glucose, which is sugar in your blood sugar, and how it was potentially making people more vulnerable. Because we know that conditions like diabetes, and this was the premise, that's a strong risk factor for severe COVID, for long COVID, and also other infections. And what they came up with from their scan of the literature was really that having that increased levels of blood sugar was associated with negative impacts at every stage of that viral infection process, from when it first attaches to cells, to how it replicates, to impairments in how our own body was able to produce antiviral mechanisms, the functions of different immune cells. So, and also we know that sugar disturbs the barrier integrity, tight junctions between cells that should really be keeping harmful things out. And so they came up with this conclusion that, we normally have, even in our airway surface, we have this sort of mucus layer naturally on our airways, and it's normally low in glucose, but it's higher certainly in higher risk diabetic patients, but also it fluctuates depending on what we're eating as well, right? And so normally you would need a really high viral load to start causing damage for a virus to be able to start causing damage to that surface. But when your blood sugar is raised, when the surface liquid sugar is then raised, they were saying that even a low viral load exposure could start causing problems. So it was very interesting what they were coming out with. So I talk a little bit about that in the book as well. And certainly all of the other ways that sugar can derail our immune system. And inflammation is produced by our immune system. That's one of our defense mechanisms, which it uses in a very controlled way to
it's trying to help us.
It's trying to help us, right? And it's only when we have too much of it and when there's no productive target, like you're not actually trying to fight a germ at that moment, that it becomes
just turned on all the time, because we've now turned it on all the time because of what we're consuming.
Right. And you're just feeding that cycle of creating inflammation, and you're priming your immune system to react inappropriately to things, to be sluggish when it needs to defend against the germ, and to be hyper-reactive to things that it shouldn't react to, like foods or pollens and things like that in our environment. So it's a really important piece of the puzzle.
It's so, there's so many ways I could take this conversation. I was like, based on what you said, that I wanted to ask you, but I guess I'm wondering, well, first of all, I do know we also, as a society, right, we're consuming like how much sugar a year on average? Like, it's ridiculous compared to our ancestors. I mean, our bodies weren't designed to have this access to this much sugar.
That's right.
So that's why we're creating this overload.
It
is trending down. Well, maybe because people are more aware.
But it's still really high. See, that's the problem. Like, it's still way, 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 way higher than it should be. I mean, we have the conversation around sugar has been going on for several years now.
Yeah.
And so I think that there has been a turn, but it's not anywhere near coming down on average to acceptable, to good levels. And it really is something that hides out in our food supply, in our food chain, in our
that's
foods.
The problem.
I think that's one of the problems, and it's so addictive.
It's in your ketchup, it's in your salad. If you're right, I mean, you're buying the store-bought stuff.
It's in that chai tea latte, whatever. So much sugar in those kinds of things, and we don't really always realize it. I think most of us know, obviously, don't want to add piles of sugar to our foods.
Yes.
We want to stay away from highly sweetened beverages and things like that, but it's just not always obvious that it's in our bread and that it's in this.
Right. It's literally sneaking in so many different ways, which accumulates. So you're thinking, oh, I'm actually doing okay. And then you don't actually realize you've consumed way more than is healthy per day. With our immune systems, is it a snapshot in time? And what I mean by this is, even like I had told you, we had to reschedule because I ended up getting COVID. My whole family got it.
Yeah.
And I have friends who, let's say within a household of 5 people, the wife and daughter didn't get it, but the husband and the 2 boys did. Or like, so when we're hit with a virus, is it about our immune, because maybe this is the place to ask about innate versus adaptable immune system. I don't know if this is where this comes into play, but I'd love to touch on that. But is it based on how we've been doing for the last few weeks? Or is it just our bodies are either sort of strong or weakened? Is that
Right.
oversimplifying it? Can you just explain? Because it's curious to me why some people don't get it at all. It's going around a house. Do they just have stronger immune systems, or do they just have a better, last few weeks leading up to that? Maybe they slept better than everyone else. I don't know.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I mean,
yes.
From a nutritional perspective or functional medicine perspective and thinking about immune resilience, I mean,
yes.
It makes total sense that we all have different levels of immune resilience at any one point in time, right? And so, and also immune resilience is something that you build up ahead of time. Once you're faced with, a germ that's trying to make you sick, you're in a totally different scenario. Your body is using nutrients totally differently. It's already, to make you sick, it has to already get past things like your barriers, your frontline barriers that I talked about, and the microbiome might be off or whatever, And so finally, if it reaches your immune system and starts to make you sick, it's come through a lot of different layers. And so, we all would have different levels of resilience in those different layers before that germ arrives even to meet an immune cell, right?
Yes.
So that's one thing. And then again, going back to this concept of shoring up resilience, even when we think about nutrients, once you're sick, your body's actually using nutrients very differently. So our level of vitamin C utilization goes right up, which is why vitamin C can be helpful. And people often do turn to that, right?
Yes, for sure. I was taking a ton of vitamin C when we were sick. Yeah.
Something like that. We use a lot, our immune cells use a lot more glutamine for energy when we're sick as well. In fact, normally your cells rely on glucose for energy production, which obviously fuels everything that cell needs to do. So it's fundamentally important. But when you're sick, it uses as much glutamine, which is actually a type of protein building block. It's an amino acid, which is a type of protein.
Yes.
And kind of the neat thing about that is that glutamine is really abundant in bone stock for food, right? Food bone stock.
Yes.
So when I think about like traditional chicken soup, not Campbell's chicken soup from a can, isn't that kind of neat that, here's this traditional food and recipe.
All many cultures all turn to the soup. Yes, it's fascinating.
Yeah. And, other things are happening. For instance, when you're sick, your body sequesters iron out of circulation. And the reason for that is that many germs can use iron to grow, so much so that your body's developed this mechanism to reduce the level of circulating iron.
That's so crazy.
As a way
fascinating.
Isn't it fascinating, right?
Yes.
But iron is really important for your immune cells to function.
Oh, wow.
And one of the places that it gets sequestered into is actually your immune cells, which is kind of cool, right? Because then they have it there ready to use for oxidative burst or whatever. But it means that you can't correct, slightly low iron once you're sick, because your body doesn't want it circulating. It wants it in your immune cells ready to fight and do their job. So that's another really interesting one. So it's all like sort of the message is really like building that resilience ahead of time.
Yes.
To help us have that best chance. Because
it doesn't mean we're never going to get sick, even if you have a strong immune system. This is not about that. It's about having your immune system doing its best job.
Yes.
If and when, or inevitably, you're faced with a virus. So, so just because someone didn't get it doesn't mean their immune system was stronger than someone else's?
Well, I think that could certainly be one explanation. And that's certainly my, from where I'm coming from, that seems like a very reasonable potential explanation. There are probably other areas, like perhaps that person's immune system has seen that germ before, but didn't get sick.
Yes.
There's other things that might be potentially happening that if you ask a physician, they might be talking about things like that as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Let's talk about, I just was going to ask you about this anyway, just explaining the difference between innate immunity versus adaptive immunity and how that plays into this whole puzzle.
Yeah. So when you're born, you have innate immunity. That actually includes everything from your barriers to innate immune cells. Like, for instance, one type of innate immune cell is called a natural killer cell, which sounds kind of
I've heard of
intense. You've heard of that?
Yeah.
It's very well known for
maybe in your book.
Antiviral.
I probably read it in your book.
It's really good antiviral, general antiviral, right? These are not specific to any particular germ. These are your innate immune system is like a blanket defense against any kind of germ that might come your way. Also, by the way, natural killer cells are really key for eliminating budding cancer cells in the body. So when we have our cells can kind of go in a wrong direction sometimes towards cancer, and it's our immune system's job to identify them and actually clear them out. So we do want our immune system.
We have cancers growing in our body, right? At times, and then
hopefully the body is cleared. Yep. When our immune system is able to work well and do that. So then our adaptive immune system is what our immune system learns as it meets different germs.
Got it.
So here it meets, say, like the COVID virus.
Yes.
And then it starts that process of figuring out how to create antibodies and very specific types of other immune cells called T cells that can target that particular germ. Right.
Wow.
And so you can imagine that the general innate immune system is a bit like kind of going in there with a sledgehammer and just bashing about until something dies. Your adaptive immune system is like the SWAT team. Goes in and they just get their target and then they're out.
So cool.
No mess. So, a little bit like that. But it takes a little bit longer for your adaptive system to kick into gear, especially if if it hasn't seen that germ before. So you need your innate immune system to be like holding down the fort as everything else ramps up and gets ready. Which, by the way, that's a huge amount of cells that your body starts producing to fight that germ, a huge amount of then antibodies that it produces to fight that germ. So it's really resource demanding.
Yeah.
Which is why, again, shoring up resilience ahead of time, nutritionally. And then, it's also why we need a recovery time after we've been sick, because we need that rebuilding time from the heavy demands that it's caused.
It's so fascinating. I mean, I think I had read that, like, for example, with the Spanish flu, that people who are whatever in their 90s still had I don't know if it was the T cells, but they still had antibodies for that flu, like 90 years later.
Amazing, isn't it? What our body can do. I mean,
right?
It can store. So this is what was published in one paper, and I put it in the book because I thought it was just so fascinating that our immune memory can store defense mechanisms, antibody structures, to over a quintillion different types of germs.
Quintillion.
So quintillion type of germs. So what an amazing capability that there is, to basically create a library of information that it can pull from, because you don't have circulating high levels of circulating antibodies to all those germs at any one time.
No, your blood would be too thick, according to this infectious disease doctor I had on. She said, you can't have, like, after you've had the vaccine, the antibodies will come down because your blood would be too thick. Like, that's not how your body's. Yeah.
That's interesting. But that makes sense. It would just be too much in the blood then.
Yes.
So it's stored in sort of a memory form with very low levels of the antibodies, but that ability to ramp up. So, even, exactly. So even based on that, right? when our body is using nutrients to help fight an infection, we need all those nutrients that help create new cells.
Yes.
There's a bunch of them, like folate, for instance, B12, zinc, really important nutrients for that cell proliferation when we're mounting an immune response.
Okay. So I'll ask you about the nutrients in a second, though. So now I'm understanding those. So in essence, vaccines are helping with adaptive immunity.
That is correct. So vaccines are entirely within the adaptive immunity bucket, because you introduce a little bit of that germ and exposure to either a disabled form of that germ or a dead form of that germ, or even just a piece of that germ, or in the case of the RNA vaccines, you're introducing something which your body can then use to produce pieces of that germ and then build antibody memory to that.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's talk about nutrients. Are there certain foods that you'd say, well, I'm thinking already based on what you're saying, but like to stay away from, and then like maybe your 2 to 3 like go-to favorite immune boosting foods that maybe you and your family are eating every day just because they're so amazing?
Okay. Yes. Okay. So we mentioned sugar. That's definitely one to stay away from in terms of like the big bucket things.
Yes,
right?
Big bucket.
I'll hit on those because the rest of it would be in the book. But
sure.
Then the other thing to stay away from as much as possible as well is processed foods.
Yeah.
Not least because they tend to contain, a lot of the sugars that we want to avoid.
Yeah.
But they also contain inflammatory fats most of the time, like too much omega-6 fats or oxidized fats or too much saturated fats. And so we want to keep those more in balance in the body and protected so that they're not oxidizing. And also that's where we are more likely to encounter toxins in our food supply, is through that processed food bucket. And, I don't know if you've had folks on who talk about toxins and toxicity and endocrine disrupting chemicals, which is the catch-all term, which is recognized internationally, even by the World Health Organization, of chemicals that are known to have these damaging effects in the body. And unfortunately, they're kind of pervasive in our environment. So we want to just where it makes sense, we want to just reduce our exposure, because certainly they're known to disrupt our endocrine system, which is our hormonal system, everything from insulin to thyroid hormone to estrogens, testosterone, like super important stuff. But what's not usually recognized is that these endocrine disruptors are also immune disruptors.
Oh, wow.
So we know that things like BPA, like phthalates.
I just read your article on the BPA. I didn't realize it was like, now I'm like, oh, I use the toilet paper to blow my nose sometimes. I'm just getting BPA up into my body.
Well,
never knew that. I didn't even think about BPA in toilet paper. I didn't know that.
It's interesting, isn't it? I know. So, toxins can be one of those things that can leave you really feeling kind of very unsettled, because when you learn about them, read about them, you kind of realize just how much we're exposed to, and it's everywhere, right? So our bodies do have some capability to process environmental toxins. I do like to mention that it's not totally doom and gloom. Like we do have this capability. Obviously, it varies from person to person, depending on like their nutrient status, their genetic makeup, like all these different factors can vary, mean that people have a different level of toxins that they can process. But, what most of us can't handle is like an unprecedented large amount of these toxins sort of swimming around in them all at the same time. And so just identifying where we can reduce our exposure is really important. So
like hair care, like
personal care products, really important. Household cleaning products, all this kind of stuff, what we put in our yard, like all these different areas. So just where we can, starting to learn about that and reduce our exposure is really important, because I probably don't have time to talk too much about it now, but in the chapter where I talk about toxins, like you can see how the research is really identifying, well, okay, this one is known to reduce the activity of different immune cells, or it disrupts our microbiome, which is so important. And so, it's one of those hard areas that is also really hard to study.
Yes.
So you'll often hear this pushback to like, well, there's no randomized controlled trial on that toxin, right? But there can never be a randomized controlled trial on toxins, because review boards, which have to approve human research trials, would never approve something where the expected outcome is harm. So the only way that we can study toxins is by observing what happens to people who in our environment, by measuring, say, blood levels and then correlating that with symptoms. And so these really important kind of indicators are strongly suggestive that we need to pay attention.
Yeah, it's so important. And actually, interestingly, I did a rerun this week of a podcast, a woman who started a green line of skincare after having been diagnosed with breast cancer. And one of the articles that I had found was that I think in the EU, they banned like over 1,300 chemicals known to be these endocrine disruptors. And the United States bans 11. And the legislation hasn't been touched since like 1938.
Right.
So some countries are doing a better job of...
It's different, yes. And so the US stands out as being quite permissive in the use of different chemicals, right?
That's
then the onus is more on us.
That's right.
And I really like resources like the Environmental Working Group. They have this Skin Deep database where you can go and you can search for products that you use, and it will give you that it will give you a score of the
safety data,
the safety level of that, and it will break that down as to what's in that product and what the potential effects are from the different ingredients in it. So it's really, really valuable. And if you want somewhere to start with reducing your toxicity after you're reducing your processed foods, then that's the place to go for sure.
Yes. Okay. And then like 2 to 3 favorite immune boosting foods.
Ooh, immune foods. Okay. Garlic. I mean, garlic is so interesting. It's so potently antimicrobial. So, I mean, we use it as in supplement form, in concentrated supplement form, to actually address things like dysbiosis, which is where your microbiome is off. Or we might use it for another condition called SIBO, which is bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine, which you might have talked about before. And so, but we can also eat garlic, right? So including garlic in your food is a nice way to just add a little bit of antimicrobial punch. It's also anti-inflammatory. It has a whole host of other benefits. So I like that.
Yes.
See, I have a section in the book where I have all of the immune superfoods. So which one shall I pick?
I know there's so many. That's why. I don't know if there's probably ones I would imagine in your diet that you're feeding your children and yourself, that they're probably like, it's always in your mind, like, I want the kids to have this every day.
Yes. So, well, kiwi fruit is another really good one because it's so high in vitamin C, as well as a bunch of other nutrients, phytonutrients, which are really important. You'll learn about that in the book if you read those different kinds of phytonutrients. And they've even shown in research studies that eating just 2 kiwi fruits per day can reduce incidence of colds. So, I mean,
wow,
that was pretty cool.
That's amazing.
Isn't that amazing? That amazing?
Yes.
And so, yes, and that also gives you a full amount of vitamin C, RDA for vitamin C that you would need per day as well. So,
and they taste good when I like them when they're more ripe. Yeah. They're a little softer, not too.
Yes.
Yes.
Not too tangy.
That's how I like them. But yeah.
And then let's pick for number 3, let's pick mushrooms, because I'm sure you wouldn't really think about mushrooms when it comes to immune health, but mushrooms and everything from even just the white button mushrooms that you find, but also, all those interesting medicinal mushrooms like shiitake mushrooms and really interesting. I like to include those because there's even more data about how beneficial those can be. But even if you just buy the white button mushrooms, they all have something in them called beta glucans.
Yes.
And beta glucans have been shown to do a whole bunch of different interesting things. So first of all, they can help the microbiome. And second of all, they're able to attach specifically to receptors on your immune cells to stimulate their activity, help them work better, which is really pretty cool. And beta glucans are also shown to increase something called secretory IgA, which is something that we produce on our barriers. It's a little antibody, actually. It's a generic antibody in this case. And it's involved in that one of those mechanisms of first line protection before a germ even enters your circulation. Because it goes onto all of your barriers and it does its job out there. And it's also involved in immune tolerance, which is a really important concept, because that's what we're talking about when we say we want to try to reduce inappropriate immune responses to foods, like food allergies or pollen allergies and stuff like that. So secretory IgA plays an important role there too. So that's just mushrooms.
It's amazing. Your son never developed all those other potential allergies, did he, based on what you did as early prevention with the eczema? Isn't that true?
So his eczema is totally clear. Food allergy was already present, and once you have food
it was present, which was just what triggered the eczema. Got it.
So that won't. Well, we are actually undergoing immunotherapy to reduce his reactivity there. So that so far is working quite well as well. And he already had also, when you ran the test, like reactions to pretty much every kind of environmental you could test for: the spring pollens, summer pollens, fall pollens,
like me,
dust mites, things like that.
So you can't cure that. Or you can just...
He doesn't have day-to-day reactivity to those things other than a little bit in the springtime, which is pretty easy to sort of control, and it's very limited. But if you look at it on paper, I remember Dr. Fitzgerald saying to me, gosh, if based on what you see on his blood work, he should be reacting all the time.
Right.
And
but he's not.
But he's not. So, she was very sweetly saying, I think, what you're doing is on the right track to help bring down his actual clinical reactivity. Like it's not manifesting as it might do, given what his blood work looks like. So
that's fascinating.
That was
I
really
asked
positive.
Because you talk about in the book about how the cells are turning over so frequently, like our skin, right? And inner lining of our gut. Does that mean in theory that we can... Well, that we should obviously be able to improve our health, but are we like developing like a whole new, like how involved is this in terms of immune health? Like how much control do we have if we're feeding the good stuff and starving the bad? I mean, do we have more control than we realize?
We have much more control than most people would be thinking of and that we would realize, because yes, your barrier cells, well, most people know their skin sloughs off. Exactly. The same is happening in your digestive tract.
That I never knew till I read that in your book. I thought that was so interesting.
Even more so than on your skin. Right. Super interesting. I mean, you think it makes sense, right? Because
it does.
Any kind of pathogen as well, it's going to have a harder time fixing an attachment on a barrier that's basically always renewing as well. And it's very, very thin. Like the epithelial barrier there is just really one cell thick. Is really, really very interesting, but it's very nutrient demanding. So like making sure that we continually help that is going to go a long way. And because it's turning over so rapidly, we can really get in there and have a big impact by adapting to, what we just even simple tweaks to what we're eating, depending where we're starting from, to support that barrier integrity, to support the microbiome, to provide the nutrients needed to create those cells. And, it's all really possible very quickly in many cases.
Yes. So like in the case of your son or even me, I found that certain things like the response isn't as severe, or it doesn't impact me. Maybe it did the way that it did even as a child. So maybe we do just sort of outgrow some, or like our bodies, maybe it's the adaptive immune system is adapted enough that we don't get as reactive to certain things.
Well, that's great. That right? That's great as well. But also, I'm pretty sure that you're doing a tremendous amount of work through your food choices, through your lifestyle choices, and all of that's going to have an impact on all of those pieces. I guess,
yes. If you're in tune with your body, then I think, because it's like you realize the dairy wasn't great for you. So you can make the choice to keep having it and having the reactions and not feeling maybe as vibrant, or you can choose to eliminate or reduce it, right? I mean,
right. And then that should reduce inflammation in general, and hopefully reduce the, the potential negative effects down the road of worsening disease.
Yes. And I know we've gotten, I just want to ask you one more question, if that's okay, about inflammation, because you wrote early in the book that 1 in 3 people will get cancer in their lifetime. That's a very depressing statistic, I have to say. But it sounds like chronic inflammation is potentially a part of that. So how do we, is it what you're talking about? Like, how do we reduce that inflammation? How does somebody even know? I mean, I guess, is that an example where you would recommend, like, I find that a lot of functional medicine say no dairy, no gluten.
I'm not that black and white. It really depends on the person.
Right. Okay. That's what I was curious.
Yes, I would be looking for signs of inflammation, different kinds of conditions and clues, either physical signs and symptoms or medical conditions, or, we can also look internally. We can run tests to show different levels of inflammation.
Yes.
We can look at the microbiome, which can either reduce, or we can look at the microbiome.
How do they look at the microbiome?
So through stool testing.
Stool testing.
Stool testing, which is very commonly used in functional medicine as well.
Sure.
So we can see, like, what is the profile of that microbiome? Is it pro-inflammatory, or is it looking healthy and anti-inflammatory? But really, it's about, when I'm working with somebody, it's about their unique
because
situation.
Everybody reacts differently.
Everyone's different. Like, was the inflammation coming from their microbiome? Is it coming from processed foods or sugars in their diet? Is it coming from a food sensitivity? Is it, all these different factors could be playing a role in inflammation in our body. And yes, inflammation can create havoc. It's like one of those central, what do you call that? Like a fulcrum point of inflammation that can then branch off to all different kinds of conditions, including cancer, things like that. So it's really important to keep inflammation at healthy levels, at bay, as much as we possibly can, and support our immune system if we're worried about cancer as well. Going back to that, the concept that our immune system is responsible for cleaning out those early stages of cancer cells, and making sure that we're giving our immune cells what they need to do their job properly to
keep us as strong as possible. Well, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, to work with you, get an individualized plan, and obviously to find your book. So I'm going to read the title again. It's called Immune Resilience: The Breakthrough Plan to Protect Your Body and Fight Disease. Where is the best place to direct someone, Romilly?
So, it's wherever books are sold. It's at Barnes & Noble, it's on Amazon, wherever you like to get your books. It's published here in the US through Penguin Random House. It's also published in the UK. So it's available there as well if you have any British.
We have international. International,
and British people. In terms of getting hold of me, there's 2 websites. There's immuneresilienceplan.com, which is focused on the book. And then there's romillyhodges.com. And you can also find me on Instagram. But yes, on romillyhodges.com, there's also a way to work with me if you want to become a client as well.
Yeah. And what are you on Instagram?
At Romilly Hodges.
It's your name. And just so everyone knows, I will be linking in the resource section over at thegoodlifecoach.com. Everything that we talked about today, there will be a link to these websites for Romilly, to her book, to the environmental working group, like all the things that we talked about today, just to make it easy to find. I could talk to you all day. It's just so fascinating. I feel like I have a new appreciation, though, for just how wise and, how our bodies want to be well, and how much control we actually do have. And I think that's important.
Right. And just focusing on taking away the things that are getting in the way of that vibrant health and resilience, and adding in the things that create it. And yeah, and we can boil it down to those two things, even though there's many layers within that.
Of course.
But it's really, I'm totally passionate about the topic, and thank you so much for spending the time to chat with me about it. And
such a pleasure, really. I've learned so much both from your book and then this conversation, and I know my community is gonna love this so much. And I hope pick up a copy of the book, because you've got even a plan for. I went to it after I got COVID. It was like, oh, what do you do if you get sick? What supplements?
There's a chapter.
We didn't even get into supplements. I know.
Recipes.
We could do a whole. Yeah, and the recipes are great. No, but did I see Parmesan in one of those recipes? I feel like I did. And I was excited to see that.
Yeah, I have to skip that. I have to leave that out when I make that recipe, or I use the vegan Parmesan. But, I'm not against people who can eat dairy.
Yeah, it's just know your body. It's know your body.
Exactly.
Yes. Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you gained some new information or inspiration for your life. That the essence of this show is to really wake up to what's possible for you, to reclaim your beautiful voice, and to really learn to love and prioritize yourself. So if you gained any value from any of the conversations you've tuned into, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast player. You can do that right now on your phone. And please do consider leaving a rating and review if you have yet to do so on Apple Podcasts. It's actually how more women can find the show. And I really want to grow a community of women who are loving themselves and living full on. So thank you as always for tuning in. And I look forward to reconnecting with you next Wednesday. Bye for now.